Hello, I'm Emma Tracey and I'm the host of weekly podcast Access All from the BBC. We're all about disability and mental health news and stories. You can listen to every episode of our podcast on BBC Sounds and every single one has a transcript. A link to the podcast will be in the description below this video. This signed version of the podcast is a conversation I had with author, journalist and mental health campaigner Bryony Gordon. It's a lovely chat about mental health, addiction and Jareth, which is what Bryony calls her OCD. Hope you enjoy. I'm so delighted to welcome Bryony Gordon. Hi, Bryony.
Hi, Emma. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming along. Seriously. Of course, I'm going to turn the tables on you now and ask you the question that you ask all of your podcast guests on your Mad World podcast. How are you really?
I'm really good. I'm all the better for being here with you. No, I'm okay. I'm in book promo mode. So it's a bit overwhelming. But I'm sort of trying to ground myself, if that makes sense.
Yes, because when you say the same thing so many times, it probably feels like you're dreaming. It's, it's like people who work on a checkout, they can hear it in their sleep.
Yeah.
Boop, boop,
but also, I don't know. That was a really good impression.
Thanks.
I don't know about you, but what I write about is mental illness and my history of mental illness. And so it's really beautiful to be able to talk about it and connect with people, but it can also sometimes be quite overwhelming. And my processing of things can be I can feel quite sort of stunned.
It's interesting. Your new book, Mad Woman, kind of reflects how you've started to change your thinking around mental health. Tell me about the book.
I wrote a book called Mad Girl about 10 years ago, which was all about my experiences with OCD. And in the intervening 10 years, I've learned so much about myself. I've got sober. We like to have this neat narrative, don't we, of neat beginnings, middles and ends. And so I suppose people like to think you wrote your book about OCD and then you triumph over adversity and you trot off into the sunset and live happily ever after. And as we all know, that's kind of life is a bit more nuanced and complicated than that. And so for me, definitely during the pandemic, I found that I didn't pick up a drink, but I did develop binge eating disorder, which was it took me a while to realize that was what happened. I kind of fell back into quite a bad depression and the OCD came back pretty viciously. And I learned so much about myself through those episodes. I really thought I'd sort of got it licked, to New Year's Eve 2019. I was like, I'm sorted, I've triumphed. And then the universe was like, that's not going to happen. The thing I say about all mental illnesses is that they thrive by lying to you and by isolating you and by telling you that you're a freak and by telling you that you're alone and by telling you that no one is going to understand what you're going through. And so depression, is very vicious and you often tell yourself you don't have depression, you're just being an idiot. And during the pandemic, it was the first time I felt depressed and I realised that everyone else around me was depressed too. And it sort of just jolted this thing in my head of what if mental illness, is actually really appropriate? It's almost always really appropriate. It was appropriate that people were depressed because we were in lockdowns. We weren't allowed to connect with each other. And it started me off down this sort of path of thinking, well, actually, what if the mentally ill, quote unquote, among us are actually the most sane? We're responding as we should be to. And I do really believe that a lot of mental illness is your brain's sort of a very sophisticated way of your brain trying to tell you something isn't right in your life.
Well, how does that affect how you manage it, how you treat it? There'll be lots of people with mental health difficulties listening who are men, women, have had it lifelong, have been able to work. How does your approach affect how you go forward with it?
So I think that's a really important thing because when I say that, I don't want to undermine mental illness. I know that it's not that simple. And what I try to do by writing these books is to show how recovery is messy, and it is not linear. And I'm sure anyone who has been hospitalized with a mental illness will understand that. You don't just get better and then that's that. They're chronic health conditions, basically. And for a lot of us, they are really baked in because, we didn't get the help we needed when we should have done.
Partly because we're female because we're women.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's mad woman. Do women get a rough deal when it comes to, say, seeing the doctor, for example?
I mean, do they? You tell me, Emma. Like, you know, like we know this, right?
Yeah. It's like,
you know this.
I've got this. I've got a bit of anxiety. Oh, it's because you can't see. Of course, you're going to be anxious. You know?
Yeah. So the mad woman of the title is a bit tongue in cheek, Emma. It's a bit like, I am mad. I'm bloody angry. So the subtitle of the book is How to Survive a World That Wants You to Think You're the Problem. Okay. And what I'm trying to say to people is, if you are mentally unwell, if you are down, if you are low, if you are experiencing difficulties, there's probably a good reason for that. Yeah. Can we stop with this way that society gaslights people and sort of treats them like they're freaks or there's something, you know, it's like, actually, I'm trying to say, especially to women, you're not the problem, you're the solution, you know. Women, we live in a society that has not been set up for us, you know, and you'll know this. You on many levels live in a society that isn't set up for you, you know.
Yeah.
The moment you can go, instead of feeling like a freak for having mental health issues, if you can sort of say to yourself, or if someone can say to you, well, actually, your brain is doing what it should be doing. You know, it should, you know, your brain is sort of processing life because it's hard.
Yeah. So, and your brain's doing the best it can. So,
yeah. And so,
like when you were younger, you had OCD when you were very young, and you'd look back on that now differently.
I definitely think that what OCD was for me, and still is like, it's a kind of safety mechanism my brain employed that's gone wrong, you know, that makes me feel less safe, actually, fundamentally.
But it's hard for people to not feel like they're freaks or out of the ordinary when they go to the doctor and they would just say, lose weight, or they would just say,
that. It is really hard. I think that as women especially, we know about the sort of gender health gap. Yeah, my experience was always, whenever I go to the doctor, is like, try losing weight or doing some gentle exercise. I always say gentle, as if I couldn't handle anything more than that. And of course, the irony being, Emma, as you know, I do quite hardcore exercise on a daily basis. I'm like running, crossfitting.
Yeah, but they look at you
and they go, no, you couldn't do that. Like, so I always was dismissed for these palpitations. They're like, it's just stress, it's just hormones. And I'm like, where is the just about hormones? They're the most powerful chemicals known to humankind. But anyway, it turned out that I actually had an arrhythmia, and I had to go to the doctor and have an echocardiogram, and he was doing my chest, and he started telling me about the triathlon he'd done at the weekend, and he like mansplained the triathlon to me. It was like, a triathlon is, and I'm like, I know what a triathlon is, and he's like, it was really hard, and I did it in Spain, so it was really hot too. And I let him go on, and I let him have his, you know, plaudits and go, oh, well done for doing a triathlon. And then I said, I've done a triathlon. And he went, what? And I said, yeah, I did a triathlon a few years ago. And then he said, oh, where was it? Like, was it somewhere as hot as Spain? And I was like, yes, it was in Sardinia. And he went, what? And I went, I've done 2 marathons. And he genuinely, Emma, he looked at me and he said, how extraordinary.
And then he couldn't get you out of there fast.
Yeah. And I was like, I love defying people's expectations.
One of the things that a lot of the papers have picked up on, mostly talking about your chorizo blackouts, is binge eating disorder.
Yeah.
And that came along after you got sober.
So binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder in the Western world. It's I think if you it's sort of as many people as people with anorexia and bulimia combined. And in fact, lots of people in recovery from anorexia end up developing binge eating disorder because, you know, there's a good reason for that, a biological reason, that if we starve ourselves, you know, our brains want to kind of compensate by forcing us to binge, but it's also why lots of people get stuck in this pattern. So between restricting food and binging food. So for me, I realized I was eating vast, and we're not talking about, you know, a packet of biscuits or, you know, a bar of chocolate, vast amounts of food, sometimes out of the bin. And it was to sort of try and calm myself, really. It was the only way I knew, you know, in absence of alcohol, because I'd been sober for like 2.5 years at that point. I couldn't pick up a drink, so I picked up the food instead. And I look back on it, I have like a lot of compassion for myself because, in a way, I'd rather I picked up the food than the alcohol. But it was really hard, and it was as dark as the last days of my drinking were, the shame, but also, like blacking out, like really just numbing myself to the point of not coming round and just being food packets.
And how do you treat that when your body can physically survive without alcohol, even though I'm sure it doesn't feel like that at the time, but it can't survive without food. So how do the treatments differ then?
So, it's really interesting. So eating disorders experts say it's like having to take a tiger out for a walk 3 times a day. It's difficult. And obviously it's different. I mean, I had therapy. I was really lucky to be able to have that. But often the way these things are treated, if you are brave enough to go to the doctor and say, I'm compulsively eating, you'll probably get put on a diet. Right. And that's actually the worst way you can treat binge eating disorder because it gets you stuck in the restriction binging pattern. Right. Women often message me and say, I think I've got binge eating disorder. I'm so ashamed because I put on weight. Right. And I want to say to them, it's not a weight issue. It's like a soul issue. And if you go into treatment for binge eating disorder and your goal is losing weight, your only goal is you're probably not going to get better from it.
Thanks to Bryony Gordon for coming in, and thanks to you for watching. Let us know what you think of the podcast by emailing accessall@bbc.co.uk. And if you've enjoyed it, you can subscribe to us on BBC Sounds, and every single episode has a transcript. A link to the podcast will be below this video in the description. And watch out for more signed episodes of Access All coming your way on YouTube very soon. Goodbye.